Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
We can meet our destiny to build a land here that will be for all mankind a shining city on a hill.
You're listening to the Liberty Brothers Radio Show, only on Revolution Radio. Now, here are your hosts, Jim White and Jason Van Tatenhove.
Crusade for freedom is your chance and mine to fight communism.
Please hang up and try again.
Hi, this is James White from the Liberty Brothers Radio Show, and I'm on the line with my co-host, Jason Van Tatenhove, and author Gerrard Williams. Gerrard is a co-author along with Simon Dunstan of the book Grey Wolf, The Escape of Adolf Hitler. It has been turned into a film, and it's based upon the shocking revelations in the book. The book is currently published in 25 countries. Gerrard, thanks for joining us today on the Liberty Brothers Radio Show.
Great pleasure, James. Hi, Jason.
Thanks for joining us. So this is a pretty revealing book. If what you're talking about is true, it really is going to challenge our notions as to what we think of as history. Before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about your background and kind of what brought you to this story?
Sure. I've been an international television news journalist, since the age of 19. I've traveled to 65 countries, covered the end of Gulf War I and the end of Gulf War II in Baghdad, both times. 2.5 years in Serbia during the Bosnian War. I covered the massacres in Rwanda, the election of Nelson Mandela to be South African president, and pretty much all of the major stories outside of the USA and Asia of the last 25 years. The last big one I did really was Sri Lanka, was the tsunami when I was in Sri Lanka the day after for Sky News. But most of my life I've worked for the agency Reuters, Reuters Television, or for Associated Press Television News or the BBC at foreign editor level, duty editor level. How this all started was I was sitting in a car park in the Green Zone in Baghdad and with a helmet on and a flak jacket, trying to find the car that was meant to take me out the Murder Mile so I could get out of that damned hole, and realized I was just too old for this stuff anymore. A friend of mine was coming out of Afghanistan at the same time, with dysentery, a great cameraman buddy of mine, and he and I met for a beer in London and said, let's go do documentaries. We've had enough of this, we're too old. And we were about 42 at the time. So we had never been to Argentina, and we thought we'd start with A. So we went to Argentina, did a bunch of documentary films for Al Jazeera, British Broadcasting, Channel 4, various people, and wanted to go back. And I started to look around for stories that I thought would be worth going back to do. And I came across this story, which has been around for a very long time, that Adolf Hitler had escaped to Argentina in a submarine in 1945. And I thought I would just do a silly half-hour conspiracy theory film and see if I could sell it to the History Channel. And when I first started looking at it, I seriously did not take it seriously at all. And then I started to do some research. And then I started to do a great deal more research. And when you go back and look at the contemporaneous reporting from people like the BBC, UPI, AP, Reuters, they all tell a completely different story to the one we've been told for all our lives. Stalin said he'd escaped to Spain or Argentina. Eisenhower said they had no proof that he was dead. We actually know the name of the pilot who flew them out from Berlin in the final days, Captain Peter Baumgart. Who later in a Warsaw court gave details of how he got them out of there. And then when we started to look at the Argentine end, we found more than a dozen witnesses to Hitler and Eva and their two daughters living in Argentina post-war until his death in 1962, 17 years later than we'd been told. And that's when I brought my co-author, Simon Dunstan, in. Simon is not alternative either in any way. He's an author of 50 military history books. He's one of the world's leading experts on the tank, actually, fighting armored vehicles. And he said, I'm never going to write a book about Hitler escaping, Gerrard. It's completely stupid. And then he took a very thorough look at the information we had and changed his mind completely, said this book has to be written. And so we wrote it.
Wow. before we get into the book a little bit, can you talk a little bit about being a established journalist that's working with, you know, some of the top names in the mainstream media, and kind of having your worldview, I would assume having your worldview turned on its head a bit. I mean, you've come from a world where history is supposed to be a certain way, and
yes.
Something as big as this must have had some pretty big impact on your worldview. Can you discuss that a little bit?
Sure, it's been incredibly unsettling. I've been quite lucky in my career, if you can call it a career, in that I've only ever dealt with international news stories. So basically wars, famines, civil unrest, political changes, and things like that. I've never actually been like a White House correspondent or a Westminster correspondent. I've only ever really been a reaction force person. So, a big story would break, and within 4 hours, I'd be on an aeroplane going to cover it. Sometimes I stayed with those stories for a lot longer. I did 2.5 years, I think I said, in Yugoslavia during the wars there. And so I had never really done it. It's all sort of, like 3 minutes, 3-minute news pieces. So I'd never really done much until we started doing documentaries of long form media. But having gone through the research aspect of this and realizing that an enormous amount of what is in the book, the involvement of US companies in Nazi Germany throughout the war, how the Reichsbank in Germany kept speaking to the Bank of England throughout the time that the war was on. In fact, the two bosses of the rival Nazi bank and the Imperial Bank in Britain were homosexual lovers from the 1930s onwards. And then to find out that IBM effectively ran the counting machines at Auschwitz and Dachau, and Americans were on the ground helping those machines be used by the Nazis to count how many people they could kill. That ITT owned 25% of the Focke-Wulf company, which made the fighters that went up against the American bombers to shoot them down over Germany as they were trying to smash it into pieces. And then when you find out that the Ford Motor Company made a third of the vehicles that the Nazis used during World War II, and that Hugo Boss designed the SS uniforms, your worldview changes completely. It's something I'll go on about probably a bit with you guys, because I do go on about it a bit. But it also led me to realize that there are two Americas. America One, which I like to think of as people like John F. Kennedy, Eisenhower, Roosevelt, Truman. And then there's America Two, which are people like Allen Dulles, John J. McCloy, the Bush family, and various other nefarious people who actually don't give a damn about your boys on the ground or my boys on the ground or anything like that, or who's right and who's wrong. All they care about is making money. I think Dick Cheney's the latest example that would come to mind. More of your tax dollars have gone into his pocket than ever went into Iraq to help anybody.
Well, absolutely.
Well, you open up so many. I'd say you open up so many doors. You know what? Man, there's so many. One of the first things I thought of, Gerrard, when I started looking into the claims about Hitler, we're living in the times of deposing dictators. You got Mubarak, you've got Saddam Hussein. I mean, a little while ago, you've got they're trying to do Assad now. I mean, these people are typically billionaires with a B. Gaddafi. My thought is, after, I don't really sit around thinking about it much, but after I started looking into your book, have you ever, my question is, has that made you wonder, did Saddam Hussein really die, or was that a double of his and he's whisked away somewhere? I mean, do you ever think that now? No,
I'm trying to remember, but I'm pretty sure I actually saw Saddam hang, not in person, but on video.
Oh, I did too. Too, but there were like three Saddams apparently.
Yeah, there were lots of Saddam doubles, but I would have thought it probably was Saddam. Yeah, it's difficult because I haven't done a huge amount of research on that one. It's difficult for me to call it. I like to talk about things that I actually have close experience of, if you know what I mean. Stuff that I've actually researched. I try not to go off into the into the world of conspiracy theories so much And I'm sure that a lot of those conspiracy theories are valid, and they're not theories. They are actually the exposure of conspiracies. But I'm somebody who likes to, and I think that goes down to my journalistic background, I like to walk the ground. I like to interview people. I like to read deeply into the subject matter. And this damned Hitler story has taken up most of the last 8 years of my life.
That you say witnesses, that was going to be one of my next questions. I know there was, if I remember correctly, there was a young lady who would, if I remember from your book, there's a young lady who would take phone calls, I think, for Hitler, or she was almost like a runner for him.
She worked for two of his closest friends in Argentina, where he used to go and stay, and actually they stayed at his house while the young girl, as she was then, Catalina Gamero, would wait on him and do his washing. But Hitler would ring her boss, Ida Eichhorn, up until 1962, from wherever he was in Argentina, for a chat. They were close personal friends.
Now, Gerrard, for our listeners that may not have been exposed to the book or read it yet, can you talk a little bit about the timeline that you go over in the book and kind of bring us from where, modern history kind of has us before we're invading Berlin and whatnot to where your book brings us, where he's, down in dying in 1963 down in Argentina. Can you give us a brief overview of that?
Well, why don't we start when the Russian troops actually take the bunker complex in Berlin,
sure.
Which is May 1945. With them is a BBC reporter called Thomas Cadet, who we would say he's embedded with them now, but he was just with them. Cadet gets to the bunker. They find no evidence of a dead Adolf Hitler. There's no mention of Eva Braun. The Russians are given 6 bad copies, as they describe them, of Hitler. There's no sign of them having been put in a pit, petrol being poured over them and burnt, as a number of the witnesses, the Nazi witnesses, and we must remember they are Nazis who were interrogated by the Russians post-war. And there's a lot of mystery surrounding it. Marshal Zhukov, who's in command of Soviet forces in Berlin, says he could have flown away. There was an airfield available to his disposal. Stalin accuses the British of having him at one stage, and then later goes on to tell one of your senior diplomats that he was convinced that he had escaped to Spain or Argentina. What's interesting is that the Soviets then changed their mind and changed their story and say, no, we've got his skull and we've got his jawbone and probably bits and pieces of Eva Braun. But that skull has now been DNA tested almost 5 years ago in Moscow by an American whose name unfortunately escapes me at the moment, but by a DNA expert. And it's that of a woman in her 40s. So it can't be either Adolf Hitler, who was 54 at the time, or Eva Braun, who was 26. And it's female. So it's definitely not Hitler's skull, unless he was really fooling us all. What happened is, according to... Well, so we're told, anyway, in accepted history by a man called Hugh Trevor Roper, whose only claim to fame before the war had been that he'd been a professor of medieval historian who'd written a book about Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, a rather obscure medieval figure in the Catholic Church. But he was put in by the authorities, especially the British authorities, to write the ultimate story, to close the ultimate criminal case of the period. Why they didn't put in the FBI or OSS or MI5, MI6, or even somebody from Scotland Yard who'd had some experience in criminal cases has always been something I've found terribly surprising. It's also surprising that despite the fact they also didn't find Martin Bormann's body, although the Germans said later they did, and DNA tested it, and it was definitely Martin Bormann, but they had checked Bormann's DNA against an unknown 83-year-old relative who they refused to name, so that doesn't ring true to me either. Bormann was actually charged with crimes against humanity at Nuremberg. Adolf Hitler wasn't, even though they had no corpse. They had no proof that he was dead.
What type of... I know that you had said that they had funneled... I don't remember the date, but I know they started funneling money...
from 1943 on.
I'm sorry?
From 1943 on, after Stalingrad, really, when Bormann especially realized that they could not stop the Soviets.
How How much are we talking? I mean, we talking in our times? Are we talking multiple billions of dollars in our kind of currency? Or what? I mean, what type of stash did they build up for this endeavor?
We're talking country buying money.
Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking well beyond the dreams of Croesus, as they say. But it's not just money. What Bormann did between 43 and 45 was persuade a lot of the German industry to also move their capital out of Germany. And they did this by simple bank transfer through Switzerland, who took their 6%, as they always do on a deal, and move it to safe havens. And those safe havens included Argentine banks, Syrian banks at the time, and Turkish and Egyptian banks as well, because they were all friendly to the Axis. But it's not just the looted gold and treasures that they took, and quite a lot of those ended up in South America. And there's over, I think, more than a quarter of what they looted from Europe is still missing. They took enough money not just to buy them safety in Argentina, but to pump back into Germany after the war and create what became known as the West German economic miracle. It's the reason why Germany is the dominant economic powerhouse in Europe today. That's all based on the fact that the Nazis got their money out and then the Nazis put their money back in.
So that's an incredible claim. Sorry, Jason. That's a shocking claim that Germany's prosperity right now is traced back to Nazi money, is what you're saying, to this day.
Almost definitely. But I mean, there are so many shocking things about this period at the end of the war. Truman said that you would not, as an American government, you would not be able to hire anybody who'd been a member of the Nazi Party. And he made this very, very clear. So OSS, under Dulles, brought in Werner von Braun and almost 2,000 or 3,000 other scientists.
Operation Paperclip?
Yeah, Paperclip, and there are a couple of others that go on at the same time. And, of course, Operation Paperclip put America on the moon. It didn't matter that Werner von Braun was responsible for the deaths of 4,500 London civilians or 30,000 forced laborers in German death camps. It didn't matter. You guys wanted to go to the moon, or some of you guys wanted to go to the moon, so you brought in Nazi war criminals to work for the American government. And I find that really quite shocking. And the horrible thing is it perpetuates to this day. NASA recently released a video about the craft that would go to other planets and possibly discover other life forms out there. And that craft is to be called the Werner von Braun. Well, for me, it was like somebody giving the job of air traffic control over New York City to a member of Al-Qaeda.
Can you talk a little bit, you mentioned earlier about the Bush family and their ties into things for those of our listeners that may not be familiar with that history. Can you talk a little bit about the ties that the Bush family had into this?
Yeah, I mean, the first president, George Bush, his father, was just got away with trading with the enemy throughout World War II. Charges were brought and then dropped against him. But they made a fortune out of selling additives to go to German petrol to improve their bomber and fighters' abilities. Of course, the whole Standard Oil, Chase Manhattan Bank involvement with all this, and Prescott Bush, I think, his involvement, was pretty well known after the war, but it's all been cleared up ever since. And it becomes very secretive. It's interesting to note that George Bush, the first George Bush president, was also director of the CIA at a time when things were very interestingly happening in Europe, and had close links to people like John J. McCloy and Alan Dulles, who, of course, both sat on the commission, the Warren Commission, into JFK's murder, which is a bit like putting two of his worst enemies on to find out how he died, which still seems to be in dispute.
You know, Gerard, I've been called a conspiracy theorist, I'm sure as you have as well. I'd tell you one thing, just based upon the things you just mentioned, it almost looks like, do you think it's a conspiracy, or do you think it's just a group of guys and gals, I'm sure in some cases, that just want to get together? It's just all about money. Is that the root of everything, or is there a
No, that's
world control?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I've been asked whether it's the Illuminati or whether it's blood and cross skulls or
Skull
something.
and crossbones, I think, right?
Skull and crossbones, or whether it's the Masons, or whether it's the Templars, or whether it's
Jesuits are another one that I always get thrown in there.
Yeah. I mean, they all have very different approaches to life. I think what it is the people who meet at Bilderberg every year and their friends. And they go there and they say, so what's of interest to us? Where can we make some money? And somebody says, well, the Middle East is always good for it. Okay, fair enough. We'll put some pressure on the puppets in government, because that's effectively, unfortunately, what they are. That's what America One has become, puppets. I mean, I think your government has been described now as not a democracy. It's run by oligarchs. People like the Koch brothers having so much influence in it, and it's hugely expensive now to become a president or even to become a senator or a congressman. And very similar things are happening in the UK, where the 1% rules everything. So I think this 1% exists, but they aren't all members of a secret society. The only secret they have that they keep from us is that they want to make money out of anything they possibly can.
You know, I want to ask you this question, Gerrard, and the reason I'm asking you is because you have just such a wide and vast experience in journalism all across the world, and which is quite impressive, I have to say. You've seen another journalist apparently be beheaded here in the last couple days.
Yes.
Just, you know, and I'm only asking, it's not about the book, of course, but it's because I know you probably have friends in journalism still, and I'm sure it probably hits kind of close to home with you, especially you've probably been in some of these places. What do you feel about these beheadings? I
have friends who knew James, and my thoughts go out to their families. What do I think about these beheadings? I think IS are incredibly dangerous, but I also think we need to look at this world, realize that Saudi Arabia, who is America and Britain's biggest ally in the Middle East, beheads 30 people a month. I have no idea what the figures to a judicial execution are in America or for people being killed by guns, but a lot more people get killed by bad people than a couple of journalists and a British aid worker. IS are obviously a bad thing, but America and Britain created them. You know, they took down Saddam, and they're helping take down Assad. Neither of them are good people. We have to look at what we do. America launches drone attacks into Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq every day. And, you know, that's acceptable for some reason. I think
not to me. I'm ashamed. I have to say, I'm ashamed at sometimes how my country has done some things in my name. It's shameful, I have to say. I mean, I love my country, don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-American, but I'm anti-decisions that these people have made in my name. I don't agree with that at all, just for the record.
And for the record, I'd like you guys to know I'm not anti-American either. I'm very anti-America too, which is, I think, the people who actually cause all the trouble. And amongst them, I was amazed to see Henry Kissinger being lauded this week. From Cambodia right the way through the revolutions in Latin America, the murder of 30,000 people in Argentina, which was rubber-stamped by Kissinger. And yet this man is still considered a great American by a lot of people, it seems. And that great American's wanted in Europe. If he ever steps foot in Portugal or Spain, they'll put him on trial.
Oh.
For human rights violations.
Gerrard, can you talk a little bit about, you've kind of made a progression from no problem, from being in the mainstream and reporting news for all these different agencies. Has there been an effect after writing this book and putting it out there? You know, obviously it's going against the grain of history or what they tell us is history, and revealing some truths that some very powerful people may not want to have revealed. Have you had any pushback from this? And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, Simon and I had planned a second book called The Spider's Web, which, and Sterling, who are wholly owned by Barnes & Noble in the States, who are our publishers in America, because we were about to expose the Catholic Church's role in the escape of over 100,000 European Nazis to South America at the end of World War II. Sterling's lawyers got terribly nervous. Hang on, sorry. I'll do a pickup. Sterling's lawyers got very nervous and decided that they would not publish Book 2 unless we took out huge insurance on their behalf, because they were concerned that radical Catholics in America might burn down Barnes & Noble's bookshops. Our solicitors in Britain thought that was very, very funny. However, the book still has not been published. And it's things like that that make you wonder why people don't want the truth reported. And anybody who reads Grey Wolf will find that there are, 85 pages of references at the back. This isn't something we did in our back bedroom off the internet. 18 trips to Argentina, trips to America, hour upon hour in the archives. When we say something, we actually have the evidence to back it up.
No, it is very, very well referenced. I've got one more question for you, Gerrard, and and then afterwards, of course, I want you to give out any websites, Facebook pages, that type of thing.
Sure.
Is it fairly common knowledge? I imagine you probably in Argentina, you probably hit the street and probably did some gumshoe type investigation. Was it common knowledge amongst the population there that this had occurred? I mean, is there a legend that goes through there, or a rumor, or is it just pretty much everybody knows it, no one just talks about it? What was the feel? What was the feel basically of the population as far as that's concerned?
Well, up until 1982, Argentina was a military democracy where you didn't talk about things. It's changed quite a lot now. I think of the 140 Argentines, actors, crew, technicians, and everything else I had working with me on making Grey Wolf the film, every single one of them had a story about either their family knowing Nazis after the war or them knowing Croatian Nazis after the war, how that Perón's government's military police and secret police were all trained by Nazis at that time. If you go down to Bariloche, which is where a lot of them went after the war, you couldn't even join the ski club there unless you could prove you'd been a member of the Nazi party. And that was post-war.
Wow, it sounds to me like if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, huh? It sounds like it had a you're probably onto something. Now, I know I said
James, I'm just completely shocked. Because as I said earlier, I was going to do Grey Wolf as a joke. Grey Wolf was going to be a silly conspiracy theory, a little documentary. And it's turned out to be a great deal more than that. And the more we're actually out, I think, in 13 languages in 31 countries at the moment. We're about to be translated into German, which will be interesting, because we still don't have a German publisher, and Arabic, of all things. But the more we've discovered, the more people hear about us, the more people come back to us with more information. And, of course, a lot of it's rubbish. I mean, I had one person come back to me who said that, from Argentina, that she knew the location of the submarine that had taken Hitler there, which I think was probably blown up well offshore at the end. And then she went on to tell me that she had the Holy Grail in a bank in Argentina. And I said, how do you know it's the Holy Grail? She said, well, Jesus appeared to me in a dream. And you can't really go with people's information when they start saying things like that. You think, I'm sorry, but you need help. Yeah. But we get some good information coming through, which has been fascinating.
Now, Gerrard, just one more quick question from me. This has kind of been just a eye-opening project. What projects do you have on your horizon now that you kind of have a new view of the world and know that some of these things that you in the past may have thought as conspiracy theory may have a seed of truth to them? What seeds of truth are piquing your interest right now?
Well, what actually is piquing my interest right now is I also write World War II fiction, and I'm writing a series of 8 novels about the adventures of a British officer in World War II, and various things in various places, all of which are set in real circumstances, but obviously are fictional. I reached the stage with this project, the Grey Wolf Project, that I got so tired of chasing Nazis and chasing down their wealth that now I much prefer to kill them. I was going to use a bad word there, guys. I much prefer to kill them in fiction now. So I think we'll go back to this whole thing at some stage. But currently, the Grey Wolf drama documentary is out in America on December the 9th. The book is already out there, as you well know. And we are talking to various people about turning this into a feature film. But I'm trying to back away from anybody who wants to put in the obligatory zombies or make the OSS guy a hero. So we're having discussions with various people at the moment.
Well, that's excellent. That'd be great. Wonderful. If the we may actually have you back after the movie gets released here in the States. If you could let us know, Gerrard, what websites
Sure.
for people that are interested in knowing more about you. Your book's on Amazon.
Yes, it's on Amazon and on Barnes & Noble's site as well. So look for Grey Wolf, The Escape of Adolf Hitler. You can contact me through www.greywolfmedia.com, and I usually reply, depending on what the comments are. And if we do manage to get a major feature on the ground and up and running, I'd love to come back and talk to you guys again.
Yeah, that'd be great. I tell you, I have to give you a lot of props for all the diligent time and energy and effort you put into to writing the book and the research. And it's great to hear your sort of your conversion, I guess, for lack of better terms, into almost like if you want to use a Matrix reference, almost like you took the red pill. It seems in some aspects. It's always good. It's always good to see someone become more enlightened on things. From my perspective, anyway.
I do feel more enlightened, and I do feel that my eyes have been opened a great deal about how the world really works. And it surprised me that I knew as little as I did, considering what I used to do. But it's also depressing. It's also really depressing. That sometimes I hark back to a time when I was a quiet little Catholic boy who thought his politicians were decent and not corrupt, who didn't realize his priests were being even more corrupt in dangerous ways, and who believed that the world was basically full of good people. And I don't anymore, and that's quite sad.
Well, that's part of the awakening in general, and we talk about that quite often on our show, that when you're inundated with so much hopelessness, at times it is easy to get thrown down that spiral. But we've got to find ways to prop each other up and find the good in life out there, because there is still good and there is still hope worth fighting for. So thank you so much for what you're doing. We really appreciate the work you're doing, and thank you for joining us on Liberty Brothers today.
My pleasure, James. Jason, thank you very much.
Gerrard, thanks so much. Bye now.